Okay, sounds good. So thank you, welcome for the second time for the first breakout session. So I'm Alvaro Montenegro. I am the Chief Product Officer for the joint venture. I'll do a quick introduction and some context setting for the first breakout session. So first, you will hear from Ed Croker, our product owner for the risk applications, including the gateway. And then from Jay Mehta, he's our product owner for the premiums applications. The most important part of today's session is we're going to be completely open, completely transparent, and we're going to try to answer as many of your questions as possible. 4 important points. The first one is our methodology is scale agile. That means that, as Bob James said at the beginning, we do not have all the answers. We design, we discover, and we build as we go along. We will have the answers at some point in the future, but we do not have all the answers yet. The second part is that you will hear from the product owners that are with the build teams, with the build squads, actually building this. So this breakout session is not aspirational. We're talking about the reality of what it's in scope, in budget, and the things that we're doing right now. We are not building a rocket ship or a Ferrari. We are actually building a reliable machine that can make the platform of future upgrades. That's the most important part. As you know, we have very old mainframes, our beloved mainframes. We need to get out of those in order to be adaptive to the market needs and to enable innovation. The third part is that although today is about the build, so the coding of the machine, anybody that has been on a transformation program knows that coding the machine is maybe 30% of the effort. There's a lot of things still to be done in terms of operation, cultural change, redoing contractuals, service design. There's so many things that happen after the machine is built. And this is where actually the unlocking of the benefits for the whole market happens. And finally, the JV has invested in the last few years quite a bit in terms of changing how we operate, how we deliver, so we can be better for the market. This means that this transformation program, we see it as our first step. So everything that our future, we see it as starting from this space. So thank you for joining us, and I'll let Ed and Jay take us through.
Thanks, Alvaro. So, yeah, I'm Ed Croker. I'm the product owner for Digital Gateway, or IROS, or Digital Risk Service. Lots of different names. They all mean the same thing. I know from a lot of the questions that I hear from the market that we've been answering sort of through the frequently asked questions, there's lots of different expectations around what the gateway is. That's somewhat understandable. I think it's the concept first appeared in Blueprint 2 probably almost 2 years ago. And it's a box on the page, and people have sort of projected their own understanding of what it is. What I'm going to talk about today is what we're actually building, and put a bit more colour around some of it, and perhaps clear up some of the areas which people are a bit uncertain on. Hopefully I'll cover off a lot in the next sort of 10 minutes, but if there are questions, we're going to leave plenty of time at the end, and afterwards please come and speak to me if you've got further questions, or sort of field them through your market engagement reps. So what is the gateway? The name has caused a bit of confusion, especially with the techies in the room. It is a gateway. It's a gateway at a conceptual level of risk information, digital risk information, into the services that the joint venture provides, the premium claim services. But it's also more than that. It supports the new placement process with the sort of the risk validation services that it provides. And that's quite different to how things are done today. So today, to the extent that risk information is used in the central services, it appears at the accounting and settlement stage. So that's perhaps many months after the placement stage. And that leads to a lot of manual processes, a lot of queries, a lot of complexity. In that reimagined process for placement, using the CDR, we're going to be bringing a lot of that data forward in the process, a lot of the validation forward in the process. And that's going to help improve confidence in the market around the completeness and the accuracy of that data. and the gateway is a key enabler to achieve that. So I'll dive a bit more into sort of the detail around the digital gateway. I'm going to go through 5 sort of key features. I'll touch on what the gateway does in those areas and how it sort of interacts with some of the broader journeys in placement into premium claims. I'm not going to sort of start right at the beginning of placement. Obviously, people are aware of things like the IMRC and the role that third-party placing platforms and other solutions have in that overall process. I'm going to focus very much on the gateway and where it comes in. But I'll put a bit of context around that hopefully as well. So let's start with ingestion. So Steve and Ruin talked a bit earlier on around the placement systems and the role they played. Whether that be a placing system like PPL or Whitespace, or whether that be some other broker administration system, third party, in-house. From a gateway perspective, we're agnostic. That process, whether it's data first, document first, those platforms manage that. They manage the assembly of the CDR data, they manage the approval of that data. At defined points in that process, they're able to submit data to the gateway. And the work that Steve sort of talked about and that Rob's been leading up around the PRR consultation is looking at what those points are. But there's multiple points throughout the process, and the gateway at those different points will respond differently and to allow you to incrementally build up that full, complete, valid CDR. And that will be not only responses that are in sort of seconds rather than days, it's also going to be potentially 2 months earlier than you might otherwise have known any challenges. So the ingestion in from the placing systems into the gateway is via REST API using Accord standards. It's a modern submission mechanism, closely aligned with some of the existing global standards. From a gateway perspective, it is the only route in. The only route in is API. It's intentionally digital first. There isn't a portal. In fact, as an end user, ultimately, you probably won't even know the gateway exists. Your interactions with the gateway will be through your preferred placing mechanism, whether that be your in-house broking system or PPL or Whitespace or whatever system that is. And those placing systems will use the validations provided by the gateway to ensure you've got a consistent set of data across the market, irrespective of which platform it's come from. So I talk a bit more about the validations. So we run through a series of automated checks and provide helpful contextual responses back to the placing platforms, and the placing platforms then manage with their user base how to resolve those errors in line with the process that the PRR group have outlined. So I'll give some examples of the sorts of validations that we do. So at one level, it's the first step is very technical things. So it's basic compliance with the Accord standards. So that's very structural things. Have you got dates? Are they in the right format? If you've sent us a currency, is it a real currency code? And those are things that any Accord platform will do. On top of that, we're layering a lot of additional business and data validations, and those are sort of bespoke things to the gateway and to the market, which are agreed with the market associations, with Lloyd's. And they'll look to initially automate a lot of the existing checks that apply to risk data that would otherwise be done in the accounting and settlement stages. So things like basic sort of contract validity checks, checking all the signed lines, cover off some of the Lloyd's specific checks, so things like some of the licensing checks, checking that we've got appropriate premium allocations, where you've got more complicated tax and regulatory considerations on a section, checking that the premium's been correctly allocated. And then also we're working with a third-party tax product to look to provide a level of tax validation, so we'll get a comparison point that we can work against to validate that the tax in the CDR is within sort of tolerances that are acceptable. We're also looking at enrichment. So if you're familiar with the CDR, you might be aware of what's been called B fields. So those are fields within the CDR which we believe are enrichable based on other data provided in the CDR, either through derivation logic or using other third-party data sources, and that'll help reduce the number of fields provided in the CDR and ensure a level of consistency. Example of that might be something like fill coding, Lloyd's fill coding. So overall, just to simplify the process a bit. The next area is storing. So most systems store data. The gateway here is storing a complete and validated record. So when we consider it to be complete and it's passed all the validation checks, we'll store it and make it available as a trusted source for the downstream system. So whether that be the premium claim system, and Jay will come in a minute and explain how the premium system is using the CDR. But also, I think perhaps more importantly, and certainly something that we hear a lot of when we, through some of the questions and feedback we get, is that record is also available to other parties in the market. So whether you're a broker, a carrier, if you're authorised with that record, if it's a risk that you are party to, it's available for you to retrieve and use in your own systems to do sort of, you imagine the sort of use cases that we hear about. People want to automatically create policy records in their back office systems, or perhaps they want to validate them if they've already entered them. You can imagine brokers perhaps using it to support some of the technical accounting process, or perhaps gaining sort of other insights and reporting in other scenarios. And then finally on to reporting. So the gateway obviously captures a lot of the CDR information, and that forms part of the broader MI landscape within the overall solutions, including premium claims. And in particular, the richness of tax and regulatory information that's captured in the CDR is going to be combined with some of the premium information to support some of the Lloyd's, specifically the Lloyd's tax and reg reporting. And overall, that's going to help simplify the current accounting settlement process. So the level of splitting required in the accounting settlement process should reduce as a result of that. But it's not all just about the business data. I think one of the things that we really can do with a new digital platform like this is actually look at some of the operational aspects as well, and really gain insight into how the product is being used. So we can target help with to particular participants, or participants can understand where they are perhaps struggling with certain parts of the data. And we also means that we can sort of much more easily target specific upgrades and functionality. So if we know that, for example, particular scenarios occurring often, we can target validations in those areas to help support the process and prioritise enhancements. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I appreciate that's pretty quick. We're going to leave plenty of time for questions, but I hope that's given you a bit more of a flavour around the digital gateway. And as I say, do stop me later if there are questions we don't answer. Otherwise, I'm going to hand over to Jay, give you the clicker, there you go, to take you through the premium service.
Thank you, Ed. I'm Jay Mehta. I'm the product owner for IPOS, here to talk about premiums, the less glamorous cousin for gateway and claims. So we'll start with the premiums customer journey, again, divided into 3 distinct parts: submissions, processing, outputs. Clean and simple. So let's talk about incoming submission channels. To start with, we are supporting transitional legacy submission channels. So we will still be catering for submissions that come in via the IMR. That's the direct load process that we all know and love. The LPANs that come in via that channel, as well as DRI submissions. In addition, where you're using reset messages for D-Link processing, those will continue to be supported as well. Over and above that, we'll have support for new submission channels, eBot, both XML as well as API, as well as a portal to allow those brokers who may not be eBot enabled to send us technical accounts that are accessible via the portal. These messages will be validated at the ASG gateway, which will perform a number of technical checks, level 3 checks, as they are known in the eBot world. Where the submissions are valid, they will be passed on to IPOS. There's also a call out here for to an LPAN digitization service where we can extract the information that's in the LPAN to process that digitally. It's important to note the LPAN does not give the same level of granularity and richness of data that a technical account does. So an LPAN will not be converted to a technical account, but we will try and extract the data from it digitally for processing. Now we move into validation and enrichment. This is where all the magic happens. So all of the processing that has happened in the last 30 years in so many mainframe systems and legacy systems, I've lost count, Lids, Porsche, Apex, e-accounts, all of that will be lifted and shifted, and we'll be creating a new service within IPOS to handle the different bureau. What will that IPOS service essentially do? It'll take the submissions that come in. If it's a technical account submission, it will validate that against risk information. So Ed spoke to you about the CDR earlier. IPOS will look for that risk record in the CDR, and where that information is available, and we have the level of data in the eBot message to check against that CDR, we'll be able to perform some of the accounting checks that we currently do manually in a more automated manner. There are obviously some validations that will already have been performed by the gateway in advance of the premiums coming in. We've got enrichment. So we've got, again, access to more data in structured format through the eBot payload as well as the CDR. So that will allow us to automate some of the enrichment that currently involves technicians looking at MRCs and keying stuff manually. Queries. There's going to be a query management module. I think that was spoken about in the previous slides and by previous speakers as well. So more near real time in that respect, allowing brokers and carriers to interact with technicians where there are queries. And when we get to the benefit slides, we'll talk about queries a bit more and how queries will be directed to the appropriate parties. On the FA side, we'll have validation against the TA. So clearly, for those who are already well-versed with the eBot space, you have to validate the financial account against what's already been agreed in the technical account. So that level of validation will happen here. On the query side, we will support multiple channels again, as we that's going to be a continuous theme throughout this. So we'll support eBot via XML and API as well as the portal. And finally, you've got a box there for reach back to legacy systems. Clearly, on day one, when we get an additional premium or return premium into the new service, not all of the data would have been migrated. So that's where we, in the IPOS service, will make a call out to legacy to be able to pull that data. So we have all the history of the premiums that are associated to that APs, and then subsequent processing can happen in the new world. So that's validation enrichment. And finally, you've got the outbound messaging. So you've got notifications going out again via eBot API as well as EDI. So EDIs aren't going anywhere just yet. And for those brokers and carriers who wish to view ANS information via the portal, that information will be available to them as well. The end of the FA process obviously has to trigger settlement as well. So this is where we'll create a new settlement service that will have the capability to interface with existing central settlement systems. So STFO, company settlement, as well as give us access to new ways and faster ways of settlement for London market, such as Vitesse, I think, which was mentioned in one of the previous slides. So that's basically a quick summary of premiums. And I'm going to hand back to Ed to talk about benefits of the digital gateway.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I think I touched on many of these earlier on, but just to recap on them. I think it's pretty quite apparent in a lot of what people said earlier on. The gateway is an enabler which delivers benefits across the value chain. These don't all appear around the gateway. A lot of what the gateway does is actually there to enable benefits sort of perhaps further down the process. I think the automation in the gateway means we can bring things much earlier, bring validation certainly much earlier in the process and be much more responsive. As I said, getting response in seconds rather than in days and weeks. And what that means, I guess, for your organisations is that means less effort in managing a lot of the query process, less queries full stop. And much earlier awareness of things that may result in problems with sort of things like contract certainty. Having built that sort of rich structured data set, that's the basis on which we can automate things, both in premium claims, as Jay mentioned, but also I think more importantly, it allows you as other participants in the market to drive automations in your own organisation, and perhaps that is as exciting. And you can probably think of examples of benefits that we probably haven't even considered yet that you might be able to do with this data. And of course, we're doing all of that with a core data standard, so globally applicable standards, a level of standardization that perhaps we haven't seen historically in the market. And that is also going to provide us a lot more flexibility to respond to sort of a changing climate in terms of regulatory needs, something that's very difficult today with the sort of the systems that we have, which are sort of less flexible to move. I'm going to hand back to Jay, who's going to cover off a few of the benefits that sort of sit across the solutions. Oh, sorry.
Okay, so just to dwell on premium benefits before we move to the overall benefits. So clearly, with the automation that we are achieving, we'll have better data quality, so reduced reconciliation issues. Automation of accounting checks will allow us to provide a more improved service. There'll be fewer queries. Queries will be routed to the correct parties. So where there is a query on a risk code, we can route that to a carrier as opposed to a broker. And no more end-of-day batches. And finally, a quick overview of the high-level customer benefits. These apply across the board, but you will have a modern tech stack. We've spoken about the move away from the mainframe, and this has never been attempted in our modernization journeys before. This will be the first time we move to a cloud-based stack, giving us all of the benefits that come with it, which are there for you to see. You'll have a single system for handling Lloyd's and company market submissions, as well as global submissions. You'll have a Cord eBot as a standard mechanism for brokers to be able to send us submissions. The submissions will come into London the way they do in the global space. We'll have brand new functionality, REST APIs, portals. We've spoken about multi-channel queries, analytics and MI, which Ed has already touched on. I am rushing these a bit because I have someone holding up the board saying we need to leave enough time for Q&A, so and there's going to be brand new functionality in terms of Accord messaging that is for carriers who are interested in for information-only type messaging. We are working with our partners, Accord, in understanding how that would work, but that will give carriers early insight into premium messages that come into DXC. So with that, I think we open the floor to questions. All the difficult ones can go to Alvaro. We'll sit at the back. Thank you.